Awesome. Chris, are you good to go?
I'm good to go.
Great. I'll share screen, stop sharing screen and hand it over to you.
All
To,
right. I see a few familiar names joining, which is really nice.
yay.
Cool. Did that work?
Yep.
Great. All right. Good morning, everybody. Bring the chat up just so I can keep an eye on it a little bit out of the corner of my eye. So for those of you, I did see some familiar names. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kris Howard. I, despite the American accent, have been living and working in the Sydney tech industry for most of the last 20 years. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. And as of 3, 4 months ago now, I am retired, which is amazing. Well, that's a talk for another day, but it's going exactly as well as I hoped it would, which is great. But this is a talk I gave a few months back at an event in Sydney called the Future Tech Collective, and it sort of synthesized a bunch of stuff that I've been thinking about with regards to the last 2 years we've seen with the rise of large language models predominantly. But I want to start by not talking about machine learning or big data. I want to start by talking about one of my favorite books. In fact, some of you know I'm a really big fan of the author Roald Dahl. In fact, I've had a website, Roald Dahl Fans, for since 1996. So coming up on 30 years that website is. And so one of the stories he wrote, and maybe you don't know this, Roald Dahl had a really successful career writing short stories before he became a children's book author. And so he wrote this story in 1953 in the book Someone Like You, it's collected in, called The Great Automatic Grammatizator. And so this story, I'll give you the very quick recap of the story. The story is about a guy named Adolf Kneip, who is a computer genius, but he really longs to be a writer. He's a frustrated writer. He can't get published, but he's a computer genius. So he goes to his boss one day, Mr. Bolin, and he says, I have an idea to build a computer that will write stories. Remember, in 53, computers were sort of, becoming a big deal. So he ends up doing it. He ends up pulling it off of building this sort of typewriter with buttons and knobs that can spew out a story. And so he succeeds, and they set up a publishing company, and they start churning out mass-produced literature. And it's wildly successful. He talks about, I can turn a knob and turn up the amount of romance, or press a pedal and the amount of suspense will go up. And they begin making thousands and thousands of dollars. And at the final part of the story, they decide that the next obvious step in their world domination is to buy out real authors. So go to like Stephen King and just pay him to never write again, to give them his name so they can churn out stories in his style. He just gets a cut of the profits. And so the surprise, everybody knows, like before M. Night Shyamalan, Roald Dahl had the sting in the tail on all his stories. The surprise is that you find out that the narrator of this story is an author himself, and that over half the stories published in the English language in the world of the story are now written by Adolf Kneip on his great automatic grammatizator. And the struggling writer is listening to his 9 hungry children cry, trying to resist the urge to sign that golden contract on the desk. Give us strength, O Lord, he prays for all true artists, to let our children starve. So now I want to show you, that was 1953, a much more modern work of art. This was an ad that Google ran during the Olympics just a few months ago. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. And it features a little American girl who wants to write a letter to her idol, who's this Olympic hurdler, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone. So she wants to be here. She's inspired by her. And so the commercial is like the little girl's dad wants to help her write a letter to her favorite athlete. And so what does he do? Does he sit down with her? Does he write the letter? No, he pulls up Gemini and uses it to write the fan letter to her favorite athlete. Right. Well, I don't like that. I was not the only one who had a negative reaction to that commercial. This is a really great rant Alexandra Petri wrote in the Washington Post. She said it made her want to throw a sledgehammer through her TV every time she saw it. And in fact, they had to turn off comments on the ad. They took it off TV immediately. If you go to YouTube, they've hidden all the downvotes in the comments. And her rant's really good. You should read it. But this bit I really liked here. What will these buffoons come up next? Gemini, propose for me. Gemini, tell my parents I love them. lying on your deathbed. Gemini, write a letter to my children saying all the things I wish I'd been able to tell them. What was my favorite thing about being alive? You're missing it. You're missing all of it. Go back home, jump back in the sea, forget it, because this is the ride and you're missing it. It's a really good rant she has. And that really was something that inspired this talk today. I am not here to talk about legitimate uses for machine learning models, coding assistants, recording and summarizing meeting minutes, handling customer support inquiries, any of the millions of legitimate machine learning tasks that, even the old ones before we called it AI, things like computer or speech recognition that we've rebranded as AI. Instead, I want to talk about how we as an industry are actually promoting and marketing this technology, specifically large language models, with ads like this one. What impression are we giving to all the people who don't understand the limitations and problems of these models? Why do we keep pushing this technology as a replacement for human thought, human creativity, and human connection? Because guess what? In case you thought that the whole industry learned a lesson from that Google advert, we definitely did not. I took this screenshot last night. Can you imagine that? Like at Thanksgiving today in the US, sitting there with your phone using ChatGPT to have a conversation with your racist uncle. I am thankful that I'm not so devoid of human emotion that I need a chatbot to interact with my family. And also, I'm pretty sure that image is AI generated. Those people have 9 different lamps in their dining room. So I want to talk about briefly, look, you know this and I know this, but I want to talk about some of the issues with AI today, and I'm going to get to the big ones that are really important to me. And one of the challenges with a talk like this is it changes so much every single day. I have a bookmark folder called AI Rant that it just keeps getting longer and longer. And as you saw, I was adding examples as most recently as yesterday. First one, of course, you can't trust images anymore. We realize this. If you didn't see it, The Verge had a really great review of Google's new Pixel 9 camera, which has the magic editor built right in. They said that anyone who buys a Pixel 9 will have access to the easiest, breeziest user interface for top tier lives built right into their device. And they showed how you could use it to invent images of people using drugs or tanks shooting guns. And all of us watching this, we grew up in an era where a photograph was by default a representation of the truth. When I get in my go-get car and the tank is under a quarter of a tank, the way I'm supposed to prove that is by taking a photo of it with my phone. We knew, of course, that Photoshop was possible. Photoshop has been possible for years, and we all know that. But deep fakes, but they're sort of outliers. It took specialized tools and specialized, exactly, like, women's magazine covers. We know that airbrushing is a thing, but fake is seen as the exception, not the rule. If I say the words Tiananmen Square, you are probably going to be thinking about the same photograph as I am. If I say Abu Ghraib or Napalm Girl, these images have defined wars and revolutions. They encapsulate truth in a degree that's really impossible to express with words. And they were pivotal. We put so much value in them. And so, the default for a photo is that it's something that's true. And that's about to flip. From pretty much this year onwards, the default assumption about any image is that it's fake. Because creating realistic and believable fake photos isn't completely trivial. And we are not prepared for what comes after. The next Abu Ghraib is going to be buried under a sea of AI-generated war crime snuff. The next George Floyd is going to go unnoticed and unvindicated. And the Verge's review ends with, "We are fucked." Apologize for that one. Of course, you also can't trust facts and citations anymore. This was a recent example of LJ Hooker was listing homes for sale in Australia and just making up facts about the neighborhood, completely hallucinating them. Because as you know and I know, these are autocomplete. They make up facts. They have no underlying knowledge or abstraction level of understanding of the world. It's just putting together words that semantically are likely to occur next to each other. So facts and citations can't trust. That goes for science too. We're seeing examples that this is being used to fabricate research and spread disinformation. This was a study just a few months back found nearly 140 papers on Google Scholar that appear to be AI generated. And 57% of those covered topics like health, computational tech, and the environment, areas that are relevant to and could influence policy decisions. And of course, people have always faked data, people have always falsified studies, but it's now exponentially easier to do this. And the researchers say the abundance of fabricated studies seeping into all areas of the research infrastructure threatens to overwhelm the scholarly communication system and jeopardize the integrity of the scientific record. And look, you're a technical person. You know that when you use ChatGPT, you need to double check the claims. You don't inherently trust what it spits out. But if AI generated text is presented as vetted academic research in a popular scholarly database, why would you even think to verify that what you're reading is true? Of course, models are trained on stolen data. There are a number of pending lawsuits against all of these companies due to their use of authors' and artists' work. This story broke literally last week. A popular data set, this data set that was used to train many of the models included every film nominated for Best Picture for the last 66 years, over 600 episodes of The Simpsons, 170 episodes of Seinfeld, every episode of The Wire, The Sopranos, and Breaking Bad. I'm sure the writers of those shows really appreciate that. So if you wonder why many of the guilds in Hollywood have been striking over AI, this is why. These artists deserve to be paid for their work, not have it used to train models that could very easily be used to replace them and put them out of jobs. An example much more closer to home, just a few months back, the Books 3 library that was used to train Meta's Llama model, among others, included more than 180,000 pirated ebooks, including many from Australian writers like Geraldine Brooks, Leanne Moriarty, who wrote Big Little Lies. Do you know what the average income for an Australian writer is in this country? $18,200 per year. One of them said in that article, if tech companies are able to generate their own books and stories, why would they sell anything else? Why would they give prominence in the market to any sort of competing efforts? I don't see why they would. Talk about letting your children starve. And look, maybe you think that is totally defensible, fair use. These AI companies aren't doing anything, unethical. Which I'm sure they could totally prove if they hadn't accidentally erased a ton of the evidence that was subpoenaed in one of these recent lawsuits. Yeah, totally, totally accidental. Trained on bias data. This is a really, really interesting one. This paper came out back in August. Lots of people, there's been talk for a number of years now that when you encode bias, because humanity is biased, you get racism in machine learning models. But and most of it is overt. You ask an LLM to describe someone of a particular race, or you ask them, a doctor is always a man, or the MIT visual data set, that was a big one that was used for training, had racist and derogatory slurs on images of Black people, Asian people, and women. But this paper focused on a more subtle, covert racism, and it's wildly racist. They demonstrated that language models embody covert racism in the form of dialect prejudice. So basically, speakers of African American English, vernacular, if you give them a sample of that writing, the stereotypes it says about that person are more negative than any human stereotypes about African Americans ever experimentally recorded. Even though if you ask the model what it thinks about African Americans, it says very positive things. So basically what the models say about people of a particular race is very different from what it covertly associates with them. And you can think about this dialect prejudice, the potential for harmful consequences, like going to assign people less prestigious jobs, maybe even convict them of crimes or sentence them to death. It's really important. And look, the writing they create is crap. I'm sorry. It is, because it's trained on a huge corpus of training data. All it can ever do, all a large language model can ever do with your writing is make it sound average at best. And so Bruce Sterling here is an American science fiction writer. Some of you may have read some of his, one of the founders of cyberpunk. He wrote this really cool blog post in July. He's taking a rather sort of philosophical view of this. He calls writing from LLM a new dialect. He claims he's identified a new dialect. He calls it the world's first patois of non-human origin. And so he goes through and he actually has data here that he backs it up with. And he identifies this language, he calls it Delvish, because guess what? It tends to use the word delve a lot. There's that graph there of papers with the word delve in the title or abstract, which, yeah, shows you something. So some of the top delvish nouns: advent, forefront, insights, trajectory. Adjectives like multifaceted, transformative, rapid. Delvish really likes to delve into everything. It compares things to a tapestry. You're always embarking on a journey. It likes bullet lists with bold text. Everything is elevated or embraced with overdramatic titles. And if you think that sounds like LinkedIn, you are right. This came literally yesterday. Yes, they estimate that like 50% of the content on LinkedIn today is AI generated slop. So think about this. The Delvish is only going to get worse because LinkedIn are now scraping that content to feed into their own models. So we're now going to get Delvish fed into the models to train the next generation. And of course, it's all doing unimaginable environmental damage. Sam Altman admitted earlier this year, the least well-kept secret in the world, that the AI industry is headed for a massive energy crisis. The energy they used to train GPT-4 could have powered 5,000 American homes for a year. Within years, large AI systems are going to need as much electricity as entire nations. And not just energy, they also need enormous amounts of fresh water to cool processors to generate electricity. And we're just seeing that a lot of these big tech companies who had previously made lofty environmental claims are now walking them back because they know they can't hit them. Altman famously is banking on nuclear fusion to solve the problem. If you mention this to a true believer, they'll say nuclear is the way out here. But most researchers believe he's being wildly optimistic there. He's going to spend like $7 trillion on it, which would be the largest investment in all of human history. And even if it works, we're not going to feel the effects until the middle of the century, another 25 years, say. It's not going to do anything about the water crisis. Also, all the toxic materials generated by mining and the toxic waste we're generating. The UN have estimated that by 2030, half of the world's population are going to be facing severe water stress. And, as I said, as someone in parts of Sydney Airport yesterday was the hottest place on planet Earth, it was recorded. And so we need a big focus now on improving the sustainability of this technology with new strong regulation by legislators. And look, a lot of people can write that off as well. They say, look, it's too late. The genie's out of the bottle. I should just give up and give in and embrace this future. And so I want to talk about the real, I just can't, because this is the big one for me. I feel really strongly that outsourcing your writing means outsourcing your thinking. It would be very easy for me to prompt ChatGPT, to prompt Canva, any number of services to just spit out this presentation. Might even be better than the one I did. I would have saved myself a lot of time and effort. And that's one of the big myths of generative AI. That this we call it the productivity myth. And this myth says that saving time is the most important goal for any of us. That anything we spend time on, we should automate the crap out of that. Even things like writing a fan letter, doing your homework, talking to your family, right? But the goal of communication, the goal of writing, isn't simply to churn out completed pages. It isn't the output. Why do we give students essays? It's not because the world needs more crappy essays on Hamlet, right? It's because the process of researching a topic, of organizing your thoughts, of constructing an argument, these help you practice critical thinking. And so the end result, the page, is the end result of our thinking about the work and our words and why we're writing. So writing is thinking in a form that you can share with other people. And to take away the ability to write for yourself is to take away the ability to think for yourself. And so PyCon, many of you may have attended, just happened a few days ago here in Australia. This year was the keynote given by my friend, Dr. Linda McIver, the founder of the Australian Data Science Education Institute. Linda's an educator. She's thought really deeply about how we teach students, how we measure their progress. And Linda talks about how reality is messy and complicated. Data sets are messy and complicated. And we need a society to be strong on critical thinking, to see through misinformation, to know enough about technology to know what questions to ask. And so what she's doing is she's showing teachers how to engage students with real data sets to solve real problems and to evaluate and question the conclusions they come to. So instead of grading a kid based on them getting the right answer, they get measured on how well they can explain, how their solution works, what doesn't work about it, what they could do better, and what other explanations there might be for what they're seeing. LLMs don't do this. They simplify everything to something that sounds correct, even if it's wrong. They don't question their assumptions. They don't iterate. They don't improve the way a human would. It's just autocomplete. If you ask your question again in a slightly different way, you'll get a completely different, perfectly plausible sounding answer without having to exercise a single neuron in your head. And I give you a personal example for this. I used to work for AWS, and I know at least one ex-AWS person, Amazon person is on this call. One of the things Amazon do, and maybe some of you have seen it, is they call it a culture of innovation presentation. This is where we talk about how Amazon innovates. And I gave these talks. I gave many of these talks over my time there. And one of the things we talk about is the working backwards methodology. This is the process Amazon uses to develop new products. And as part of this, they create something they call the PR FAQ, press release, frequently asked questions. Every product or service Amazon releases goes through this process of iterating on this document, 20, 30, 50 times. Every time you go through it, the value proposition becomes more clear, the customer benefit becomes more clear. And I think it's like Amazon does some stuff that I think is not great. It's one of the unabashedly great things that I actually think I'm a fan of. Well, earlier this year, there was a big push internally. How are you using Gen AI to 10x yourself? Everybody's got to use these new tools. And one of the first things one of my colleagues came up with was, well, let's automate creating a PR FAQ. Here you just put in your product idea and the problem, and it'll spit out the PR FAQ. Great, it saves us months of effort. And I was like, are you insane? Like, to me, that's so completely antithetical to this whole methodology, to this whole process. It's assuming that the document, the artifact, is just the goal you're trying to get to, as opposed to a document of the journey you took along the way to get there. And those discussions, the feedback you get, the talking to other people, that's where the real value is in this process. So I had huge problems with that. And yeah, it was one of the signs that maybe it was time for me to move on to different pastures. And that sort of brings me to my other big problem with how we are positioning AI as an industry. Look, you can see behind me, I'm a creative person. I think that creativity, communication are at the heart of what it means to be a human being. And these tools reduce everything down to autocomplete. An LLM does not experience satisfaction, pleasure, guilt, responsibility, accountability for what it produces. It does not use language in the way a human does. So look, sitting here in front of you, I had to think about the words I was going to use. I was saying to the organizer before, to Vivek, like, I was worried that some of you might have come into this with the expectation of, we're just going to hear how to use AI in my DevOps pipeline. I had to think about how I was going to position this talk for my audience. Some of you might be all in on this technology. I had to take a social risk. You might disagree with me. You might disagree with how I frame my arguments. It might affect how you think of me. These tensions and frictions and ambiguities, these are at the heart of what it means to be a human being. We need these frictions to resolve disagreements, to have more in-depth understanding of topics, to confront wrongs. But LLMs don't do that. ChatGPT doesn't risk anything when it is prompted and it generates some text. It seeks to achieve nothing but concatenating tokens together into grammatically sound output. There's no intention there behind it to communicate. And that carries through to art too. This is an amazing piece. Please go read it. It was in the New Yorker at the end of August. Ted Chiang wrote this. And as part of it, he talks about trying to define what art is. And he decided that art is something that results from making decisions. So at a very simple example, like if you're writing a story, the decision what word comes next, that's a decision, right? Making decisions. And so if you put in a prompt, a 50-word prompt, and an LLM generates a 10,000-word story based on that prompt, it has to fill in for all the choices, all the decisions that you're not making. And there are different ways that can do that. One is to take an average of the choices that all the other writers have made, based on this training data that's found on the internet. And that's bringing everyone down to that average. It's generating delvish, really bland language. Another way of doing it is to engage in style mimicry, where you say, write this in the story of Stephen King, which is going to produce something highly derivative. In neither case does it create interesting art? The same goes for visual art as well. And he has a really good example talking about photography, that when cameras came out, people argued that it wasn't art as well. And part of the reason there was because they didn't realize the decisions, the choices that photographers made. I think nowadays we much more likely to recognize photography as a unique art form. And people are like, oh, well, doesn't that mean that an LLM will eventually get there? You know, I put so many choices and decisions into my prompt. But the whole point of these models is that you get a lot more out of it than you put into it. If you write a 10,000 word prompt to generate a 10,000 word story, you should have just written the story, right? Nobody does that. They write at best a couple hundreds and they get thousands out. And that's what prevents them from being effective tools for artists. And of course, I'm really annoyed because he uses the great automatic grammatizator in his intro, which, for the record, I wrote this talk before I saw this. It was my idea first, but it just shows that it was a really good example. And speaking of the great automatic grammatizator, I just want to mention we are now at the end of November, at the end of National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, some of you might be aware of. This thing has been going on for years where people try and write a novel, 50,000 words, in the month of November. They had a huge controversy in September because the organizers of this event came out defending the use of AI to generate your books, your creative writing. They said there's nothing wrong with that, and banning it would be non-inclusive of those who are disabled or from marginalized communities. So if you're against AI, you're against disabled people. This did not go over well. Lots of established authors, were resigning from the writing board, and then of course it came up that they were being sponsored by a generative AI pro writing aid company. And so one of the writers, was one of the disabled writers was saying, this is terribly insulting. It's insulting to imply that the only way members of marginalized communities can get in their foot in the door is through the use of a plagiarism machine. And so, of course, they ended up immediately backing down. They revised their statement multiple times. They apologized. But as one of the authors said, NaNoWriMo at its heart encourages people to set aside a time to do daily writing practice, to push through barriers of self-doubt, fear, boredom, writer's block, and to fearlessly write badly. Promoting AI to replace that is taking away the most important part and replacing it with something weird and terrible. But of course, where some see controversy, others see opportunity. This literally came out a week ago. You might have seen that. This new startup is going to use generative AI to replace all the work of a publisher. Instead of, having to get your work seen by a publisher where they proofread it, they give you suggestions to improve it, designing the cover, distributing it, generating an audiobook. Instead of spending 6 to 18 months going through the actual system, they'll just do it for you in 2 to 3 weeks. They'll just use an LLM to spit all that out. My sister, who's an editor, really found this interesting. And they're claiming they're going to publish 8,000 books in 2025 alone. Whole bookstores full of Delvish we're going to have. And how long do you think it'll be before somebody starts offering artists the rights, a cut of the profits to use their names and just let them take over? It's going to happen. Roald Dahl called it. Maybe you don't see a problem with this. Who does? Nick Cave. I want to mention this. Some of you know the Australian artist Nick Cave. He has a website where he answers fan questions. And last year, some brave soul sent him a song that ChatGPT wrote in the style of Nick Cave and asked him what he thought about it. And Cave said that many fans have done this, and without fail, all of the songs suck. He said, algorithms don't feel, data doesn't suffer. ChatGPT has no inner being. It has been nowhere. It has endured nothing. He actually called it replication as travesty, saying that in time, it could perhaps create a song that is on the surface indistinguishable from the original, but it will always be a replication, a kind of burlesque. For him, songs arrive out of suffering, the complex internal human struggle of creation. And he called it a grotesque mockery. And he's actually had a couple different letters about generative AI. It's worth looking that up. Okay, so look, I've been ranting for a good 20, 25 minutes now. Where does this leave us as an industry, as people who make our living, in many cases, from this technology? First, a little bit of a warning for all of you. Investors are realizing that this might be a massive bubble. Billions of dollars have been invested in a technology that has yet to turn into a profitable business for anybody but NVIDIA. And guess what? Just last week, their stock price started to go down because people are realizing that we might be at the top end. We're getting diminishing returns out of this. Companies like Google, Microsoft, Meta are committing vast amounts of their resources to AI without a clear monetization plan. OpenAI, they may lose $5 billion this year and run out of cash in the next 12 months unless they get a huge new injection of cash, which they're trying desperately to get. At the same time, their leaders are abandoning the company and they are pivoting from a nonprofit to a for-profit entity. So Wall Street are starting to get skeptical. If your company is gambling on AI as your path to future revenue, I would be very careful about just mitigating your personal risk, about keeping your options open in terms of your career long term. I also want to encourage you, think about your own use of these services. Look, some of them are fun. We were talking about this. Vivek was saying, writing haikus. Everybody did that, or taking selfies. I made a selfie of myself into a superhero, of course. Canva's Magic Media. I've created funny images for the Sydney Tech Leader slides. But I also have a lot of friends who are artists and writers and craftspeople. I'm sure you do too. How do they think about generative AI? Do you think your use of it devalues what they do? Are you using AI-generated content for commercial purposes, making it even harder for artists to make a living? And if you're someone who started outsourcing all your writing to ChatGPT, are you also outsourcing your thinking? Are you prioritizing output, the end result, over the effort, over the practice, over the thinking to get there? What ultimately distinguishes your communication from anybody else's? Are you contributing to the growing sea of Delvish? How are you ever going to get better? Develop your own voice, your own critical thinking skills if you aren't practicing. And, what example are you setting to your kids? And if you are an artist or a writer or content creator of any time, how are you controlling how your content is being used? This is, something a lot of people haven't had to think about, but I strongly urge you, if you are sharing content online, to review the platforms you're using and consider if you want to opt in, opt out, or even block access to your data. This is where most of us are, I think. You're actually working on AI projects. And so really what I want here is look, there are really great projects. I was saying when I gave this talk in September, the other speaker's wife had motor neuron disease and he used generative AI to replace her voice, to give her voice back. There were some amazing usages of some of this technology. I don't want to throw those out, but I really want you to think critically about the systems that you're designing and building. If you are training models, do you know where your training data set has come from? Is there any stolen material in it that might expose you to litigation? If you are training on your customers' data, do they have to opt in, which is preferable, or are you being shady and burying an opt-out link like deep in the settings? And yes, LinkedIn, I am looking at you there. If you're running a web crawler, does it adhere to the robots.txt standard to allow people to opt out of scraping? Or are you doing it regardless? Is your use of AI solving a real problem? Is it making the world a better place? Or are you just doing something flashy and chasing a trend for the sake of it, to put that little sparkle image on your website somewhere? Do you need to jam in a large language model, or would a very simple machine learning algorithm work just as well? And are the architectures you're building efficient and sustainable? Are you contributing to this massive energy and water crisis that we're facing? And for those of us in a leadership position, are you seeing the ROI in these projects? Is the upside actually there? And if not, we should be pushing back. Does your company have an official AI policy? Are you transparent with your customers on where you're using AI and where your customers' data is going? And maybe if you're in an industry that's affected by large language models, maybe you should reconsider whether you should be using these models at all. Procreate, many of you know, is an Australian tech company that make graphic design software really popular with artists and illustrators. And earlier this year, the CEO, James Duda, he's an Australian, he said, I really fucking hate generative AI. They have an explicit AI statement on their website and have pledged to never integrate generative AI tools. And needless to say, for them, this approach resonates really well with their core customer base. So if you're in an industry that is serving artisans, you might want to think about that. And lastly, I think we need to be very deliberate about how we talk about AI. You watching this, you know the limitations of this technology. So don't gloss over it for everybody else. Large language models do not reason. They are not sentient. We should not pretend that they are. And when you ask ChatGPT to count how many R's are in a strawberry and it gets it wrong, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, well, let me recount it for you again. It's pretending to be a human being. It's not. We should be sensitive to people who are being disrupted. Acknowledge what is lost when a job gets replaced by an LLM. And we should make sure that our marketing is highlighting the right use cases, the good ones, the ones that make the world a better place. And we aren't overstating the benefits of this technology. And we should never, ever try to sell it as a replacement for human creativity and for connection. And of course, like, I have a vested interest in this site. As I said, I have a number of websites with thousands of pages of real, genuinely useful content written out of my own brain with zero AI. I like coming up with things. I do think there's room for computers in making art. I don't want to say that there isn't. I curated the first Art and Tech Day at Linux Conference Australia back here in Sydney in 2018. We had a number of people who were using art and computers in amazing ways. And I've spent a lot of my career in companies who are going hell for leather down the AI path, like Amazon and Canva. But my argument to all of you watching this is that we as leaders have a responsibility to not be uncritical enthusiasts of this technology. We need to make sure our customers, our colleagues, and the general public understand the problems and the limitations. We need to ensure the products we build off the back of it are sustainable and have real guardrails. And we need to stop suggesting it be used for anything and everything. We definitely shouldn't be teaching our kids that the best way to express themselves is by going to Gemini and typing in a prompt. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Went a little over. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Kris, and certainly learned a lot. And I personally just loved like the number of citations and that. I was like making an
I will share this because I have all those
we just love the
URLs if you want to
resource
look them
there.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And I can certainly tell that ChatGPT did not write that talk. Um, just before we go into the breakout rooms, I'm gonna share the Slack, and we'd love to get some feedback as well. So I'll share some links
I will stop sharing. Yeah.
in the chat, and
There you
then
go.
for those of you on the recording, yeah, thank you so much for coming. And now we're gonna break into our breakout room, so I will end the recording. Cool. So we're gonna put people into groups of 3 or 4 people, 3 to 6 people, and what we'll do is we'll probably just do maybe 12 minutes to discuss, and then 5 minutes to share back with the group. Like we do each time, we like to have one person who's a reporter or a note taker in each group, and then a balancer who can. Oh, sorry, I didn't.